In 1937, Disney dropped a cultural bomb with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The stars were aligned, and I'm a little late to the party, but if alignment means handing a child a blade and calling it character development, then I'm right on time. Saturn was at 28 degrees Pisces. That's late stage illusion control. And considering Disney sanitized the shit out of the original story, that makes sense. Neptune sat in Virgo at 21 degrees, grounding the whole fantasy in obsessive detail. Venus and the Sun were both in Sagittarius. And since this released right before the winter solstice, here we have Snow White. Very on brand. Venus in Sag is charming, adventurous, and frankly, a little too optimistic for my taste. Perfect for selling fairy tales to a world crawling out of the Depression. Uranus in Taurus said, here's a completely new way to dream with new values and an archetype to look up to, and people ate it up. Disney milked that dream for decades. Re-releases in 1952, 58, 67, 75, 83, 87, and 1993. Saturn moved through Libra, Sag, Aries, Cancer, and back to Pisces. Neptune drifted from Virgo to Capricorn. And what changed in the film? Practically nothing. Maybe a new poster. Maybe less dust on the reel. They really said, we're keeping this fairy tale fossilized in Disney amber like a Jurassic Park mosquito, only more pleasant to think about. That kind of consistency built deep emotional attachment. Generations formed a bond with the story that felt safe, familiar, and symbolically sealed in time. The last theatrical release in 1993 happened when Neptune was in Capricorn at 20 degrees, forming a clean trine to the original Neptune in Virgo. Saturn was in Aquarius at the time, restoration, modernization, structure made new. They restored the film and surprise, surprise, it was a huge success. Again, that was a smart move. The film got a refreshed look, but the foundation stayed the same. That strategy worked. It preserved the myth, let nostalgia build slowly. The audience grew up with her. She aged like a haunted painting. Subtle changes, slow evolution, classic Saturn in Pisces. And you know, they wanted to release it in March of 2024. That might have actually worked. Venus would have been in Pisces, just like the first Saturn return. The Sun would have been conjunct Neptune, and Jupiter was rolling up to Uranus and Taurus. Actual dreamy momentum, spiritual glam, bold values. But nah, delays, creative setbacks, development limbo. That was the first warning from Saturn. Then 2025 happened, the third Saturn return. The second one passed quietly in 1965 when Venus was in Pisces and the film still had its magic. After that, they let the legacy rest before hitting the second Saturn return, and honestly, that was probably wise. But for reasons unknown, necromancy, misplaced ambition, they decided to dig her up again. And they thought they'd remix Snow White into a modern hero. They gave her CGI dwarves because fuck real people, this is fantasy, a new aesthetic, a new attitude, and tried to pass it off as if it were still the same legend. The film launched first in Spain with the Sun conjunct Saturn at 22 degrees in Pisces. By the global release, Saturn had crept to 23 degrees and Neptune was still sitting at 29 degrees Pisces, the final degree, anaretic degree, final illusions, final fantasy, final warning. And someone in the boardroom probably said, well, Saturn was there last time, so no biggie. Look at these green flags, though. Venus in Aries was trining the original Venus in Sag. Jupiter in Gemini was trining the original Jupiter in Aquarius. And oh, look, the moon's in Virgo again, a sweet little lunar return. If I had to guess, the astrologer on call probably got seduced by those trines. See, trine to Venus, trine to Jupiter, yes, but also Saturn return. FFS. Mars in Cancer was closing in on the original Pluto in Cancer. That's not a green flag. That's a screaming red siren from the underworld. It's generational tension meets cultural reckoning. Emotional defense systems, Mars in Cancer, pushing against buried power structures, Pluto in Cancer. Word of advice, don't rely on Jupiter and Venus to save you from a karmic audit, because Saturn doesn't care about your brand aesthetic. Uranus was back in Taurus too, full circle return, But instead of honoring the legacy with grounded evolution, they slapped a whole new soul on it. It looked assertive, but the core was hollow. Meanwhile, Pluto in Aquarius, also in the 12th house from Pisces, dragged up everything unresolved. Decades of expectation had been marinating. Audiences thought they were getting an evolved, soul-aligned Snow White, something timeless, but finally honest. Instead, the internet went ballistic. The casting choices, the actor interviews, the vibe shift, it all felt like being promised a royal wedding and showing up to find George from Wisconsin waiting at the altar. No shade to George. But don't repackage a fairy tale and expect the same reverence if you're not going to preserve its soul. Let's not forget the source material. The Grimm story first dropped in 1812 with Pluto in Pisces and Neptune in Sagittarius. Literal dark fantasy, death, sacrifices, maternal cannibalism, and creepy necro princes who don't understand the word no. Disney didn't just clean it up, they scrubbed the myth raw with a Neptune polish, and it worked for a time. But Saturn returns don't do gloss, they do lessons, they do consequence. And this time, the 2025 version got hit with controversy on every front. Culturally diverse, common-sized people removed and replaced with uncommon-sized animations, chastised by a real uncommon-sized real person. Archetypes dismantled, dialogue dunked on by its star, critics echoed what the stars already said. This wasn't just bad timing, it was mythological malpractice. Even though the remake scraped in $204 million, the budget was $270 million. Technically a business analyst Saturn fail. Pisces is films and Saturn is success or failure, and this remake leaned heavily on the latter. A ruined Pisces legacy, Saturn. What would have actually worked? Well, I believe one of two things. Either create a completely new story or keep the original exactly as it was. The Disney version, not the Grimm one, though that probably would have been cool too. And let's just say, for imagination's sake, that an astrologer was actually on board for this launch. Disney's astrologer back in the day, brilliant. They stopped theatrical releases right at the second Saturn return. That's strategy. That's knowing when to freeze the myth before it goes stale. The 2025 astrologer, they need to enroll in some pessimism. Just because Venus in Aries trines the original film's Venus in Sag, and Jupiter in Gemini trines the original film's Jupiter in Aquarius, and oh wow, a lunar return with the moon in Virgo again, that does not negate a fucking Saturn return. Nor does it cancel out a Sun-Saturn conjunction squaring the original Sun in Venus. Nor does it override the Mars in Cancer gunning for Pluto in the original chart like he owes him money. Who commissioned? Because Neptune, the planet of film and fantasy, was opposing its original placement in Virgo. Pisces versus Virgo. Illusion versus practicality. Fog versus function. A full-on identity crisis. And this is just the transit chart. Don't get me started on the progressions. Instead, Disney yanked the veil off and served up a different bride. The audience had spent decades dreaming of this delicate, regal figure from a magical land, and instead they got the Monty Python Mona Lisa. Saturn in Pisces is timeless, classic energy. You can't untime timelessness. You can't resurrect a myth by erasing its bones. That's not innovation, that's betrayal. So now that Saturn is out of Pisces, that was the Saturn return of Snow White. Not a curse, a cosmic receipt, and Disney cashed it with overdraft fees. Saturn in Pisces. Keep the story forever or let it go.